A family that had everything to be happy for generations, but their story wouldn't be here if that had happened, right? After all, we're on a channel in a true crime episode. What also stands out in this case are the nuances of life which end up turning love, the kind that should at least be natural, inherent from a daughter to her father, into unbridled hatred. And such intense wear and tear, or so many intense conflicts, that nothing is left except a lot of misery wrapped up in millions of dollars. I'm Marcos Campos. Welcome. If you like real stories, please subscribe and follow the channel. Leave a like or a comment, even just an emoji, as I always say. And if you can join our members club because it directly helps with the production of the episodes. Deal? Also follow me on the other social networks. I am Marcos Campos. That way you'll always be up to date and can follow all the releases here on the channel. That's it. Deal. Messages delivered. Let's get to the facts. Irina Lourdes Flair Beritila. She was born on January 28, 2002 in the city of Cordoba, Argentina. Daughter of the architect and businessman Rinaldo Flair and also of Veronica Flair, Irina had a very good, comfortable and happy childhood. She studied at the best schools and had access to trips and things that most of the children who studied with her, who were part of her social circle, did not have. But what money was left over there? In that family, sometimes there was a lack in emotional matters, which were often neglected by the whole family there, who were not as close as they seemed. All of this is going to have a huge impact. Rinaldo and Veronica loved each other. They were a happy couple who respected each other. They had something that made them walk together, without any quarrels, without any cracks. But the same can't be said about their relatives, who didn't get along very well. You know, a family that's kind of divided like that, the wife's family and the husband's family, the mothers and sisters just tolerated each other. That friction, which can be common in many families, even ended up reflecting on Irina. And since she was little, she developed a stronger attachment to her mother, much stronger than the bond she ended up forming with her father. And not even with his children or his relatives. She wasn't as close to them as she was to her mother's family. On the other hand, she loved being around her aunts and her maternal grandmother. Irina received a lot of affection from these women and spent her entire childhood being cared for by them. Well, at the age of 12 then, Irina experienced the trauma of death at an early age. For the first time, her mother, Veronica, ended up getting an aggressive cancer. And in 2014, she passed away, leaving her daughter in the care of her father. And as if that wasn't enough tragedy, her grandmother and also an aunt she lived with ended up dying at the same time during the same period, just a few months apart. This caused a really heavy and complicated trauma. A lot of suffering for Irina. This was the beginning of a phase that would get worse and worse, psychologically speaking, for Irina, who didn't know how to deal with all that grief at once. The first year after the deaths was really difficult, but father and daughter tried to get closer again. And they supported each other, right? For a short period of time, trying to recover the inherent love, you know? The paternal love and the affection that existed between them before. You know, back in her early childhood when she was a kid. However, losing a mother for Irina and a wife for her father became a very deep wound. And soon, probably because they didn't know how to deal with such sadness, both of them went through intense personality changes. Their emotions became confused, I would say. And what was just a discomfort was replaced by a deep hurt toward everything and everyone. Overnight, Irina especially realized that she was alone. Her father was absent, spent the whole day working, spoke little with her, and left her with maids. Meanwhile, in her eyes, his family didn't seem to have any compassion for her situation. Maybe because they didn't really like her late mother. Rinaldo started bringing women home and dating again after a while. In Irina's opinion, much sooner than she expected. Some of these relationships were even with people known in her circle of acquaintances, especially her mother's. Despite the outrage this may have caused, incredibly, one of her father's affairs actually turned out to be positive for her. Lacking attention, especially conversation with a female figure, Irina tended to respect and even obey. I would say to give herself more to women than to her own father. One of these women, in fact, was named Claudia, and she had a long-lasting relationship with Reinaldo. Irina seemed to see in her the opportunity to have, so to speak, a new mother. And guys, all these details are very important in the development of this homicide, okay? So we have a father who lived a very privileged, financially secure life, right? He's someone who clearly worked hard for all of that. It didn't just come to him. So he had to, really work hard, right? To be able to provide a good life? For Irina, who up until this point, even though we say, oh, she just wanted his love, soon you'll see that's not the case, right? It's not that simple. There are many emotional and psychological layers. That's why I said this case is very complex, so let's pay attention to every detail very well. While Irina was rude, I would say just like her father, she would bow her head to female authority and made a point of pleasing to be pleased. She herself took on the role of a suffocating adopted daughter. Even at a very young age, she used to see objects and people as her possessions. And the result of that, of course, was an unsustainable conflict with the children of Claudia, her father's girlfriend. Those children started to feel jealous of Irina. But more than that, they saw that their space was being forcibly taken by an intrusive girl. The result of this emotional pressure was that, inevitably, the couple, Rinaldo and Claudia, separated. Even back then, Irina played the victim and manipulated the people around her, using affection as a trap that everyone fell for. They ended up doing exactly what she wanted, assuming an innocence, a suffering, a great emotional distress because of everything that happened in her life. And no one suspected that this could be a disorder, something more serious that needed treatment. And it's exactly this trait that goes unnoticed by most people who take on raising Irina Reinaldo, for example. The father had an extremely gentle attitude as a father after everything happened. And he felt guilty for not being able to make up for, let's say, Veronica's death. So he avoided arguing with Irina or acting with any firmness in front of her. At this point, we can already notice several nuances. That's where they start building. A ticking time bomb, right, guys? This thing about the father starting to do everything she wants, right? In a more confrontational behavior from Irina, he backs down, I don't know, maybe to avoid hurting her. There's even good intentions there, but as you loosen the reins, there will come a moment when it will be hard to hold back again. The father tried to raise his daughter with a lot of affection, but more than that, by being as permissive and understanding as possible, even when she was wrong. That's the dangerous point I mentioned. I'll keep telling you all about it. In fact, it even gives me chills, it causes trouble, that's it. Well, still feeling it. Still missing her mother, Irina then turned to her mother's best friend, Veronica. Someone who could reach Irina as a maternal figure, Irina. She would turn to her to talk about personal matters, women's topics, to share confidences, to talk. But remember that Irina was still a teenager, guys. But Rinaldo ended up distancing himself from his wife's friend, which contributed to Irina's emotional isolation. Having to live alone with Rinaldo, Irina started showing signs of bad behavior. First, she became ruder in the way she communicated with her father. She started yelling, giving snarky answers, even started using explicit insults just like that and without even caring. As she grew up, what was just verbal, I would say, these verbal aggressions also started to become physical. They started with gestures, Irina used to break things at home, acted arrogantly towards her father, acted the same way with other people around, said horrible things, really terrible things, like that she wished her father had died instead of her mother. Irina would also sometimes disappear. She would suddenly leave home and come back 2 or 3 days later. And all of this that was happening at home started to happen outside as well, in public places, especially at school. Irina was already 15 years old in the peak of her teenage years, and she started drinking. She skipped classes, didn't turn in her assignments, did poorly in her studies, to the point of eventually dropping out of school. As if all that wasn't enough, she developed kleptomania and even started stealing money and objects from people, whether she knew them or not. All it took was an opportunity. And we don't really know how Ronaldo dealt with everything that was happening with his daughter, Ali. Inside the home environment, there's no way to know. What we do know are the reports, everything that was reported, what was really happening. It's a mystery, but considering everything that was still to happen, it seems the reins were still a bit loose, okay? That's why, in fact, some friends and family were shocked to witness her lack of manners and the father's passivity, who didn't correct her, didn't even raise his voice to confront his daughter. When asked then why he never hit her like any other father would, right? A good spanking or a slap with a flip-flop. Is it the same in Argentina? A flying Havaiana? Ronaldo simply replied that he would rather cut off his hands than lay a finger on his daughter. Don't judge me, it's just a joke. But for Irina, that kind of care didn't mean anything. She couldn't see her father's actions as dedication to her upbringing. I want to tell you I'm here, daughter. Let's be together, return to childhood, and be happy. No, she didn't see it that way. Maybe she just wanted boundaries. Still, it's hard to tell. Well, little by little, the connection between them was dissolving more than ever. And everything that was good, the nicknames, those affectionate things we do as a family, all of that was being forgotten. They became more and more distant. And those moments became rarer, right? Being together, sharing a meal at the table, talking, none of that. We all drifted apart, each in our own corner. But over the years, even with difficulties, Ronaldo kept trying to get closer to his daughter. They even came to Brazil for a trip, a sightseeing tour here. However, the peace had an expiration date. The teenager remained aggressive and out of control without receiving any treatment, support, or attention. More and more, she was shaping herself into a woman without character or values who believed she could really do whatever she wanted and get away with it. As more complexities appeared with her growth, other worrying versions of Irina began to emerge with new actions even more disturbing. I would say when she was already 16 years old, she became aware of her fortune. She then opened her eyes even more to everything that was happening, especially regarding the discussions related to material interests. Together, Ronaldo and Veronica, making a little detour here in the story and the chronology, the couple, Ronaldo and Veronica, built a millionaire fortune. Guys, they had a good life, like I mentioned. They had rental properties, a hardware distribution business, stores, warehouses. And that wasn't all. Veronica's parents also had at least 7 properties transferred to their daughter's name. All of them were managed at that time by Ronaldo, who even collected the rent and took care of the assets. When Veronica died, she left part of all that to her only heir, who was supposed to receive the money and the properties. Once she came of age, at least 50% of the total. But Irina became insistent about having access to the inheritance before the scheduled time, which caused anguish for Ronaldo, who thought his daughter would be unable to deal with Irina. She would ask the family's friends questions about estates, as if she were just clarifying a doubt about what she had as an inheritance. She got back in touch with Karina Caruso, that friend of her mother, to whom she said that her father was denying her money and basic necessities, which obviously wasn't true. But Karina ended up believing the girl's story and started getting involved in the case, helping Irina with advice and information. Being caught between the two, making up a bunch of lies, ended up burying for good the almost 20-year friendship that existed between Ronaldo and Karina, Ronaldo's late wife. And Ronaldo. People started to hate Karina, believing that she was making Irina's wrong ideas about money even worse. But it's not known to what extent. Having full awareness of what she had negatively influenced her perspective from then on. The fact is that she started making very serious accusations, like saying her father was taking away what was rightfully hers. Do you remember that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode about the various nuances of this case. That's it, right? That her father worked hard to give her everything? The way it's told, it seems she doesn't care. Now, at 16, she's starting to pay more attention, isn't she? Is that so? Here we have emotional issues like love and affection. But just the money. Dad, then we're going to want it, right? Why would I let it go? After all, it's mine by right. Well, Ronaldo wouldn't give in to that kind of pressure. And once again, an almost endless, humiliating fight would start, where the father was put in a position almost like a swindler, taking advantage of what wasn't his. Here, it's worth making a side note. Okay, guys, there are the properties that belong to Irina's grandparents, which were passed on to her late mother, and the mother would have left them to her daughter after she came of age. So therefore, it was under the administration of Reinaldo, her father. Remember that she was still 16 years old. Everything was within the law, perfectly normal. Well, gradually, Irina went from being a rebellious and difficult young woman to a truly cruel person. Her actions were no longer fair. Disrespectful and abusive, it began when she used scissors to cut nearly all her father's clothes. On another occasion, she threw her grandfather's ashes, which were kept at home, into the toilet. Her valuable belongings would disappear, end up in the trash, or be deliberately damaged. Every day was like going through hell, no matter the reason. The arguments would become extremely intense. Ronaldo, already nearing 60, would feel weak, stop eating, or even stop responding. On one occasion, he heard from Irina herself that she would stab him to death while he was sleeping. He was so afraid that day he slept in his car. One day, Ronaldo found his 2 little dogs dead, and at that point, he was so shocked and disturbed by everything that was happening that he even thought his daughter Irina might be to blame for the dogs' deaths. He then started telling his sister and mother that the situation was very worrying, and the 2 women even insisted that he file a complaint against his daughter, but he refused, hoping that everything would be resolved in the future. But things never got better, not even when Irina started a romantic relationship. And then, not even then, I think that was really the trigger for the disaster. At 17, Irina started dating a guy named Leandro Mascarello, who was 7 years older than her. Obviously, with that attitude, she couldn't attract someone very good, right? The guy was pretty weird. Leandro didn't really have a steady job, you know? He made ends meet with odd jobs, sometimes working with his father and brothers, but lacked steady income, and studied music in his free time. Hey, aren't these guys really trash-talking the musicians? It's a shame. That guy too, on top of it all. He was still married on paper to a woman he had already separated from, right? They were separated, and he had a daughter with that woman. Of course, given all that, right? Reinaldo disapproved of that relationship. He disliked Leandro's attitude, whom he already knew, and even banned him from entering his house. And it's during this time that things become really unsustainable, you know? Things got more tense between father and daughter, with much worse fights because of this relationship. Leandro also wasn't respectful towards Reinaldo, and even disrespected him in his own home, right? He disrespected him, not to mention the times when he secretly entered Reinaldo's house without his permission. It was the beginning of 2020 during the pandemic. And even so, Leandro broke the rules and showed up out of nowhere at his girlfriend's house. Yeah, it looks like a stack of cards, right? It just takes a little blow for everything to collapse. At home, the routine was hectic and stressful. Ronaldo had no peace left, right? There, facing his daughter's negative words and Leandro's intimidating looks. The problem was that just having the boy there was uncomfortable, because the truth is, Leandro was a bit of a rough-looking guy, you know, the bully type, and that scared Reinaldo, who had to be careful with every step so he wouldn't bother the couple. According to reports, Irina and he even had intimate relations. Even with her father nearby, she made noise just to provoke him, you know? Then in that situation, the worst happened. Irina got pregnant. This would be the last chance, maybe, for a reconciliation, for a union. After all, guys, a baby brings peace, right? That arrival of a baby, despite all the worry, all the work it takes, but at the same time, it seems like it's a comfort, you know? A light arrives that just goes, settling the dust, the unresolved things, the crooked pictures, everything starts falling into place. But things there were wild, okay? And it didn't happen there as you might assume. Irina's pregnancy left Reynaldo outraged, shaken. The drama escalated and home no longer felt safe. With constant stress and fear, Reynaldo started sleeping with the doors locked and the car keys under his pillow. Sometimes he dreamed that he would be killed, beaten with sticks by the couple who threatened him at the slightest sign of annoyance. It's like little Susanna the Devil, really. The forced quarantine scenario turned the chaotic situation into a pressure cooker. A new mess broke out there, in an incident involving new threats. And Reynaldo had to call the police because he couldn't stand asking Leandro to leave his house anymore, seeing the domestic violence situation that was developing there. The authorities suggested both leave the residence, including Reynaldo, since she was pregnant. However, according to the law, sources in Argentina say that Irina needed to stay in the property. The father ended up accepting this recommendation, and he moved to a house that was on the same street, and this house supposedly belonged to his ex-mother-in-law, Veronica's mother. That house was abandoned, but he fixed it up so he could live there. So Reynaldo left with nothing but the clothes he was wearing. Because he didn't immediately accept his daughter's pregnancy, the hurt that already existed between them came to the surface, and the two stopped talking to each other for a while. When he needed to go back to his house to get his work things and personal belongings, Reynaldo found that the locks on his house had been changed. He couldn't get into the house. It turned out that Leandro had already moved into his house for good. Such a letdown for this father, right? She made a mistake, obviously. That's true. Shouldn't this daughter get a serious talk? Hold the reins there, clip her wings in the nest before the little monster gained strength, right? Unfortunately, she turned into that little monster. Reynaldo was repeatedly kept from entering his house, he would ask, right? As I mentioned, due to his work, books, and documents, he couldn't get anything. And this situation made him finally call the lawyer to settle the division of assets. And at the same time, Irina did that too. She was already 18 then, just stating facts. She didn't want to wait another day for her full inheritance. Considering that the fortune there exceeded the $1 million mark, Irina didn't want to accept the first agreement, which only offered her 2 properties. Months later, already in 2021, through a new contract, she gained access to half of what was legally hers, which had been left by her mother, right? Among properties, stores, and also a sum of money. She then started living off the income from these assets. This whole process was slow, bureaucratic, and stressful above all, but Irina and Reynaldo reached an amicable resolution. I'd say it was good for both. They just smoothed things over. Live your life, I'll live mine. That's it. Reynaldo was beginning to feel free, like a weight was lifted and he could start over. He got rid of the burden, financial worries, and the risk from that troublesome couple, right? So after that, Reynaldo started dating a woman named Miriam, and even though Irina didn't like her, and what if he hadn't been vigilant, everything seemed relatively normal. For a brief period, it was even believed that the worst was really behind them. But make no mistake, it was the end. Leandro might have seemed like just an old rascal, you know, kind of clueless like that, but he was pretty clever, you know. Ambitious, greedy, he was close enough to know where he came from. And all that money from Irina, there was still more, right? That wasn't in his possession yet. He wanted to get ahead without having to work, and he had his eye on what would now be his daughter's inheritance. With Irina, a real bum, right? And at the beginning of 2021, Irina finally gave birth to Mia Francesca. Some of her things were left in Leandro's care when she started dedicating herself exclusively to drinking. Among these things were her partner's belongings, money, and what Leandro did. The guy, well then, he started a new business, if you know what I mean, with his brothers. And instead of helping his wife who had just given birth, that bum started mistreating Irina. He was violent, and almost every weekend, he hung out with his friends, invited them over to their house, and got drunk. In other words, guys, Zdrogino is going to blow everything and still be aggressive with the ungrateful one. It's like a seed of evil that was planted, sprouted, and now it's bearing fruit, isn't it? Reynaldo didn't talk much with his daughter, but he really wanted to meet his granddaughter. However, Irina and Leandro never allowed a visit. They didn't even invite the grandfather. He sent gifts and messages, but it didn't help much. He tried to move on, and at that point, there was nothing else that could be done. But from time to time, he insisted on at least seeing Francesca's little face, even if it was just in a photo. In mid-July, 61-year-old Reynaldo got engaged to Miriam and decided to remarry. The good surprises kept coming. Some time passed, and in December on the 23rd, Irina sent a message to her father saying that she wanted them to make peace, that he could finally meet his granddaughter. Reynaldo was thrilled. What did he do? Like a good grandfather, he went to the mall, bought a bunch of gifts for his granddaughter, and was eager to bring them over. And that's what happened. On the 25th, with that Christmas spirit of brotherhood, Reynaldo went to his old house, the house that was taken from him, to meet his granddaughter. He went there with the gifts. When he arrived, Irina opened the door and Reynaldo was with Miriam, his fiancée. Irina didn't invite her father in, possibly because Miriam was there. She said Francesca was sleeping and he couldn't meet her now. Of course, Reynaldo was very sad and frustrated, but as he always did, he avoided conflict and took the opportunity to tell his daughter that he was going to marry Miriam. And here, guys, maybe this is also one of the triggers for this homicide. We'll never know since no one talked or confessed. But the fact that the father said this to Irina and her boyfriend, her jerk husband, whatever he was, must have already sparked some uncontrollable greed there. And she said like, no, you're not going to marry her. No, that's why I mentioned that you can't really know if that was the trigger or if it already existed. Next, I'll tell you about the plan. But that night, Reynaldo, maybe obviously with the best of intentions, unfortunately may have signed his own sentence. On December 28th, around 10 p.m., Reynaldo was approached by two armed guys at the door of his house. They forced him to enter quietly, tied him to a chair, and restrained his arms and mouth with duct tape. They turned the television up to full volume, then fired 2 point-blank shots, one to his face, one to his throat. And Reynaldo died instantly. On the morning of December 29th, Daniela, one of Reynaldo's sisters, woke up worried because the night before she had called several times, sent messages, and got no response. Reynaldo wasn't answering. So she decided to call the police to do a welfare check and went straight to her brother's house, arriving together with the authorities. The investigators asked for someone to accompany them inside the house. The first signs that something was wrong appeared at the already broken door. The loud television noise was alarming. When they entered the room, Reynaldo's body was on the floor, lying in a pool of blood, and they immediately realized that he was lifeless. For the detectives, that was just the beginning of an investigation where anything was possible, such as a robbery resulting in death. But for the Flair family, there was no doubt that this was not a random crime. It was a cruel, premeditated murder. Their thoughts were shared with the police, but proof and evidence still had to be gathered. Interestingly, Irina, who lived across the street, never left her house. When she saw all that commotion from onlookers, she didn't even look. The police officers looked for Irina to let her know what had happened. They talked to her there as well, and according to what's said, she remained silent and expressionless. In the following days, she continued her routine as if nothing had happened. She even went to visit Karina, her friend, and acted as if her father had, I don't know, gone on a trip. Not that he had been murdered in such a cruel way. Within a week, she had already contacted her lawyer to sort out money issues. Yeah, inheritance, since she gets everything now. Meanwhile, the investigation continued with statements, surveillance analysis, and forensic examination. Little by little, the idea of a simple robbery weakened, since nothing of value had been taken from the house. As the homicide hypothesis gained strength, the police's meticulous work involved two fronts: technology and fieldwork. First, through the cameras, which identified two men, Samuel Moscarello, Leandro's brother, and a guy named David Suarez. They also noticed that there was a black Ford Ka, which was allegedly involved in the action. They checked the cameras on the streets and also in the nearby establishments. As at Irina's house, they saw the same Ford car parked on the 20th and 28th in the early morning. The car belonged to a man named David Silvestro, a friend of Leandro Moscarello. After tracking the phone lines, they picked up the cell phone signals of all three of them in that specific area of the neighborhood during the time frame set for the homicide. By gaining internal access to the cell phones through breaking confidentiality, the police also uncovered a scheme of buying and selling weapons that was being run by these people involved. And among the latest acquisitions was a .22 caliber revolver, which was the same caliber that took Reinaldo's life. It was also found that there was a prior meeting that same day in one of the Flair family's warehouses. Footage. It captures the moment when those involved, including Irina, enter and leave the place with a backpack, hours before the murder. All the suspects were identified through videos and later by observing their routines as well as their close relationship with the couple they lived with. Guys, to put it simply, it's a little gang gathered to do something bad, okay? In early February 2022, a month after the crime, all were indicted and arrested for suspected murder. They clearly denied involvement, but the overwhelming evidence left no doubt. The police concluded the case as triple qualified homicide, orchestrated by Irina and Leandro and carried out by Samuel and David Soares. With the help of that other David Silvestre, the motive would be to have total control over the inheritance, preventing the father from entering into a new marriage, which could result in the division of assets with third parties. The public opinion backlash then fell on Irina throughout the whole country. In order to defend herself, she agreed to give interviews to newspapers where she denied the whole story, including that her relationship was bad. In a contradiction in her statement, she argued that her father was cold and that she suffered mistreatment. She was beaten every day and was even burned with hot water, which explained her troubled relationship with him. But this was never proven. In her psychological evaluation, mild signs of psychopathy were found, as well as pathological mythomania, which causes a person to lie excessively. Before feeling cornered, Irina refused to blame her partner. Later, she began to vehemently claim that she believed he had planned everything on his own, with his evil partners. There. It's that old story, right? When the water starts to get cold on your behind, that's when everything ends, right? Love ends, passion ends, complicity ends. The pact, whatever it is, nothing is left except, of course, the desire to get away. Well, on September 20th, 2024, the trial of this group began and it went to a jury trial. The session lasted for hours and more than 20 people were heard. And in a twist, David Soares, as well as Sylvester and Samuel, decided to testify. The three confessed to the crime, but at the last minute, they claimed it was all an accident, that their only goal was to commit a robbery. And Reinaldo allegedly fought back. Sure, an accident with his legs tied up, tape on his mouth, and a shot to the face and another to the neck. That's not just being bad, that's extreme stupidity, right? No one knows why they did this, but they were trying to clear Irina and Leandro's names, as well as disrupt the progress of the case and confuse the jury, trying to get a reduced sentence. But of course, that silly tactic didn't work, right? The information was inconsistent, clearly made up on the spot. Besides that, they couldn't explain why they didn't take anything from the house if the plan was a robbery, right? Not even money cards, cell phones, nothing of value. The sentence found all defendants guilty. Irina and Leandro were convicted of quadruple qualified homicide and betrayal for their link to the victim, receiving life imprisonment. David Soares and Samuel were convicted of triple qualified homicide, criminal association, and betrayal related to the victim, receiving life imprisonment. David Silvestre, who drove the car, was convicted as an accomplice to homicide and received a 13-year prison sentence. And Irina's daughter is now under the care of Carina Caruso, the friend who ended up with temporary custody of the girl. And the child ended up becoming the family's sole heir. Flair will inherit a lot, that's true. Just not the love, which should be natural in a family, but isn't. As I said earlier, what a setup for a murder this was, right? How can a father and child relationship deteriorate this much, right? Many factors, of course, many layers, nuances, things that are way too complex. But